The idea that over 100,000 forces would invade another country after war, since World War II, nothing like that has happened.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
20 years ago this week, the U.S. launched its invasion of Iraq with devastating consequences for the country and the region. We look at the legacy of the war, its human cost, and long-lasting legal and political ramifications. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry, as we mark the 20th anniversary of the US-led ground invasion of Iraq, which began on the 20th of March 2003 with an unprecedented wave of nightly bombing raids all over Baghdad, shock and awe the US military doctrine of overwhelming force. In 48 hours or so, the US conducted 1,700 sorties or bombing raids and launched 504 cruise missiles. The United States deployed 130,000 troops to Iraq. That's almost 75% of the invasion force, with British soldiers accounting for 25%, Australians for 1%, and Polish troops for 0.1%. Then US President George W. Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair sought to justify the war by arguing that its aim was, quote, to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, to end Saddam Hussein's support for terrorism, and to free the Iraqi people. UNMAVIC, the UN Weapons Inspections Mission in Iraq, led by Hans Blix, which in February 2003 reported to the Security Council that no evidence of weapons of mass destruction was found, did not change the US and British decision to go to war. To date, no US or British official has apologized, let alone been held to account for prosecuting a devastating illegal war. Last week, just days before the 20th anniversary of the war in Iraq, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin for alleged crimes committed in Ukraine, namely the deportation of children.
It is really a very sad occasion and a very somber occasion that for the first time ever, judges of the International Criminal Court, of any court, have felt it necessary to issue warrants against a leader and senior state officials from a permanent member of the Security Council that are founders, that have wonderful histories, but also that are supposed to be guardians of the UN Charter.
In September 2004, Kofi Annan, the then UN Secretary General, called the war in Iraq illegal under international law, saying it was, quote, not in conformity with the UN Charter. From our point of view, and from the Charter point of view, he said, it was illegal. So should international justice have been served for Iraq? And does the ICC decision to seek an arrest warrant for Putin on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the Iraq invasion highlight the politicization and even hypocrisy of the court, as some have suggested? Joining me now to discuss this is the first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Ocampo. He served in that position from June 2003 to June 2012. Mr. Moreno Ocampo, Iraq is not a state party to the Rome Statute, which established the ICC, nor is the United States, but the ICC has jurisdiction over alleged crimes committed on the territory of Iraq by nationals of state parties. Does it not?
Yes, it has. Yes, we conduct several analyses of the crimes committed by British troops, but the most serious crime committed in Iraq was aggression crime. Start a war. That was the worst.
And why didn't you go after those who started these wars then, if that, as you say, was a war of aggression?
Yes, it's obvious that it was a war of aggression. The problem was, first, in those days, the crime was not yet defined. The crime was defined in 2017. And in addition to that, neither US nor Iraq were part of my jurisdiction. So I took office in those days. You know, I took office I started my tenure as the first chief prosecutor 3 months after the Iraq intervention. And everyone was asking me to do a case against US for aggression crime. And legally, I had no power to do it. So that was the problem. Look, the main crime in Iraq was the aggression. In Iraq, 250,000 people died. Few of them as a consequence of war crimes. All of them as a consequence of the illegal war. And that's why, for me, illegal war is the worst crime. That was also, yes, that was also the conclusion of Nuremberg. The worst crime is to launch a war. And Iraq was an aggression war.
So if it was a war of aggression, should the leaders of the United States and the United Kingdom and other Western leaders have been brought to justice?
The problem is, in those days, the crime was not yet defined. So the crime was defined in 2017.
Today, in hindsight, though, Mr. Moreno Ocampo,
well,
do you believe
totally
they should have been brought to justice?
Yes, but that's why we have a legal architectural flaw. We are progressing on this, so it's slowly, but we are progressing. Still a lot of things to do, but I'm totally against any aggression. Absolutely. It's the worst thing that happened. If your country is invaded, it's a disaster.
We're talking about hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians.
But, okay.
Did they deserve justice? And do you regret not having done the right thing?
They deserve justice, but the war is not well organized yet. The war is starting. The war is, I'm glad that today we have the crime of aggression is defined, but still it's hypocrisy because they don't let the ICC to do it. So there's still a lot of things to improve, and lawyers are failing to people to provide a system to protect them. And I know that. But as a prosecutor, I cannot do something beyond mine. I have a legal mandate. I had to do my legal mandate. But I saw, because I was involved, as you say, I saw the flaws.
But again, the question is, do you regret not having done more to have highlighted, at the very least, these flaws? Not to say to have gone further, to have done the right thing by pursuing justice for Iraqi civilians.
In those days, I explained exactly why we did not open investigation of the British. I explained that very clearly. People sometimes don't listen. I can do nothing on that. So,
well, you say you've explained it very clearly, but your successor, Fatou Bensouda, who reopened the preliminary examination in May 2014, did it to investigate allegations about, quote, the responsibility of officials of the United Kingdom for war crimes involving systematic detainee abuse in Iraq from 2003 until 2008. Why did you choose not to investigate these war crimes? And can you seriously say today, as you have declared in the past, that these crimes did not meet the gravity threshold? It's a serious question.
It is a serious answer. My answer is, we did our job. Fatou Bensouda came back. 2 years later, she got more information and she reopened the preliminary examination. And it's exactly what we told the British. Look, right now, we have no evidence to open the investigation, but could be reopened any moment. And 2 years later, when I left, and that is the beauty to have a permanent institution, Fatou Bensouda reopened the examination.
Did you harm the credibility of the ICC by not doing the right thing back then?
I did the right things on it. I did the thing. I took decision according with the evidence we have and my legal mandate. Sometimes it was unpopular. When we are indicted, requested arrest warrant for President Bashir, it was highly unpopular. Many people were against us. I was doing exactly what I should do. And everyone recognized I was independent. And my Fatou Bensouda, I think, showed the same. Fatou Bensouda, in fact, was designated by President Trump. And now Karim Khan is doing the same. So I'm very honored and proud that the institution is doing its job. Is solving all the problems? No, it's not solving all the problems. But you know what? I agree with you. Aggression crime is bad. It's incredibly bad. We need to fix that. I'm not against you on that. So I fully agree with you on that.
But let's be honest, though. Is the ICC really doing its job? Because many would argue that it is a political tool in the hands of the West, and that your non-action after Abu Ghraib can only support that view. Up until last week, in fact, the ICC had only prosecuted Africans.
But first, why is wrong to prosecute African people committing genocide against African?
What
Why
is
is
wrong
wrong?
is that you are selectively going after African leaders when there's, as you have just mentioned, a lot of other very serious crimes taking place by Western leaders. You yourself have called the invasion and the war in Iraq a crime of aggression, Mr. Moreno Ocampo.
Fatou Bensouda tried to open investigation of Afghanistan, including torture committed by American troops. So there are many incidents that you can see. The problem is we have to follow the rules. If the British commit crimes in Iraq, but the British investigate them, we cannot do it, okay? That's a system. That system we can change, maybe, but the biggest issue now is aggression crime is still not possible to investigate against Americans, against Russians, against Chinese, the biggest countries. So the war is still flawed. That's the point. For big countries like US and Russia, still making war is a okay strategy. And that, for me, we should stop it.
And how does that get stopped?
We need to fix the legal system, basically prohibit really aggression crime and let the ICC investigate aggression crime. ICC cannot do it. What Karim Khan, my successor, did, he found a way to ignore the prohibition to investigate aggression crime, and he found a way to investigate President Putin for something different. And it's important because the only court who can investigate President Putin is the ICC. Ukrainian courts cannot do it.
But
So
hold on,
that's
hold on, Mr. Moreno Ocampo. Can you fix the legal system without making sure that the ICC isn't used as a political tool by some?
Well, yes, you can. Look, first, I don't think when you say ICC has a good record, ICC is doing its job, it's existing.
That's
the most
subjective,
important
that it
thing.
has a good record. It is subjective. Ask
Yes,
Africans if it has a good
You
record,
and
and I
me-
think they will
you and
disagree
me-
with you. Ask a lot of people in the global
I
south.
understand. You
They
and
will
me have
probably
different
disagree.
ideas. It's fine. It's fine. We and me have different ideas. But we have to go beyond the ICC because political leaders consider war still a reasonable system to manage conflict. And that's a disaster. In the world 21st century, we cannot be tribal.
Let me ask you this then. If there had been real legal consequences for the perpetrators of the illegal invasion of Iraq, would we have seen the invasion of Ukraine?
I don't know, because I think Iraq is illegal war. And it was great that Russia opposed.
But there were no consequences. Do you think that might have led us
There
to the
was a
situation
disaster.
we're in today?
Well, there was a disaster for US. They spent $3 trillion for nothing positive. It's not about the ICC. It's about the legal system is not allowing ICC to investigate aggression crime. If you understand that, I would like to work with you to change that. I would like you help me to change that, because I really believe it had to be changed, okay? We have to convict any person who commit aggression crime, because it's the worst crime. And that was clearly in the Nazi time, and it's clear in Iraq time, and it's clear now.
All right, Luis Moreno Ocampo, former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you.
20 years after the U.S. invaded Iraq, it still maintains a military presence inside the country. There are currently around 2,500 American forces in Iraq, down from 170,000 during the peak of the war in 2007. Until 2010, there were around 100,000 contractors each year in Iraq, supporting U.S. forces, according to the U.S. Congressional Research Service. On a recent visit to Baghdad, the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said U.S. forces are ready to remain in Iraq in a non-combat role.
Our defense cooperation against Daesh is a key pillar of our bilateral relationship. And the United States remains committed to this fight.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Senate has yet to repeal the authorization to use military force, or AUMF, which was granted in the lead-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. It has been cited by the Obama and Trump administrations to justify military operations in the region. A new study by Brown University's Costs of War project estimates that the Iraq War will cost the United States $2.9 trillion by 2050. The death toll of the active war period is estimated to be in excess of 500,000. Other estimates put the number of Iraqi deaths at 1 million and even 1.5 million. This does not include 500,000 children dead as a result of punishing sanctions. So was this a price worth paying, and will justice ever be served for Iraq? Will any of the so-called neoconservatives who pushed the United States into a devastating war of aggression, as the former ICC prosecutor Moreno Ocampo just called it, ever be held accountable for their role? Joining me now to discuss the legacy of the war in the U.S. is Dennis Kucinich, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1997 to 2013. He's also a former Democratic presidential candidate. Mr. Kucinich, when you look at the legacy of the Iraq War, what goes through your mind?
A tremendous tragedy was visited upon the people of Iraq. And the United States, unfortunately, was instrumental in doing that. And the entire attack on Iraq was predicated upon monstrous lies. Iraq did not have anything to do with 9/11 or with al-Qaeda's role in 9/11. Iraq did not have the intention or the capability of attacking the United States of America. And Iraq certainly didn't have the weapons of mass destruction that it was imputed to have. That was one of the main causes of the attack on Iraq, a presumption being they used those weapons against the United States. So this is a tremendous blow to U.S. credibility around the world, but even more than that, it's a great human tragedy. I think all the time of the poor people in Iraq who died under this onslaught, and the almost 5,000 American troops who gave their life, who served honorably, but who were sent there by people who were not honorable.
Would you go further than calling it a tragedy? Because many have called it a crime of aggression.
I don't think it is unfair to call it a crime of aggression, because if the underlying predicate was false, then everything that proceeded from it was aggression. And so at some point, there has to be a reckoning. And there has to be a process of truth and reconciliation in the United States and with the people of Iraq. This is a requirement for us to be able to learn and to have closure over this. Unfortunately, there are still people in the United States who are celebrating this attack on Iraq. And to me, at this point, such a celebration compounds the criminality of the aggression. This was a crime. There's no other way to put it. And I spoke against it all the way along the line. I organized members of Congress to vote against it. 126 did. And I would, that is Democrats and one independent. And I will say that my heart breaks every time I think about what was visited upon the people of Iraq, of how their lives were destroyed, of how their families were ripped apart, how the social order was broken, how everything around them was smashed to bits. And this being the cradle of civilization was visited by the most uncivilized type of conduct by a nation that ought to have known better, but still our leaders of that time must be held accountable by such such criminal activity.
Should they be brought to justice today?
There's provisions under the United States Constitution for the individuals who led us on this path to be brought to account in the United States. There's also provisions in international law where they can and should be held to account. And I think that is still work that needs to be done. I favor at this point a process of truth and reconciliation, that people would come forward and admit their lies. And then that would in some way help to heal the wounds that have occurred in this country, and certainly the greater and more grievous wounds that have occurred in Iraq. It really it stands out as a major failure, not only of U.S. policy, but also of morality.
And you criticize the Bush administration not just for the role top U.S. officials played in manipulating information to push the United States into this war, but also for the way they manipulated the media coverage of the war. That was part and parcel of a scheme to seemingly deceive the American people and international public opinion. I myself traveled with Rumsfeld to Baghdad in the summer of 2003. And Rumsfeld was literally berating us, the journalists who were traveling with him on his first trip to Iraq after the invasion, for not covering quote unquote positive stories, even though Iraqis were still dying every single day. Some of the troops he met there were already voicing their disillusion about their mission and why they were there. How culpable has the US media been in propagating the official narrative?
Well, the media was part of that because the White House developed a internal group to create a propaganda plan to execute among the American people to try to gain their favor in support of the war. They also hired outside propagandists and experts to help to spread the word, and they hijacked the media in the coverage and sent dozens and dozens of generals and others who were so-called experts into the media outlets so that they would drum up support for the war. They created a tremendous amount of publicity favoring the war. They steered the American people to believe that Iraq was responsible for 9/11. They created this huge image of an enemy in Saddam Hussein, and they created the pretext to not only overthrow Hussein, but to later on execute him. One of the things that bothers me most about what I saw, and I was a witness to this from the United States, is that anytime I tried to talk about the casualties that were happening in Iraq, the damage that was being done to Iraq society, the deaths of so many people and the children left orphans, and as the casualties approached hundreds of thousands, it seemed it was impolitic to bring that up in the United States. It was like, well, you know, what kind of an American are you? You want to talk about the Iraq dead? Well, yeah, I'll tell you what kind of American I am. I see the world as being interconnected. I see us all as one. I see what happens to the people in Iraq, Iran, in Ukraine, in Russia, in China, anywhere, as affecting each one of us. And
so how culpable then were members of Congress, every single one of them? President Biden at the time was the chairman of the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He also was cheerleading for this war. How culpable was Congress?
He supported the war. Hillary Clinton supported the war. John Kerry supported the war. John Edwards supported the war. A whole line of Democratic presidential candidates supported the war. They thought they had to look tough. But looking tough wasn't the same as being smart. And so were they culpable? Absolutely. They had a vote. Members of Congress had to vote to license going to war.
What do you think drives this policy? Is it hubris? Is it desire to control energy markets, or simply a desire to maintain American hegemony at any cost?
Well, what drives it at its core is a worldview that is outdated. And that is that the United States needs to be the hegemonic power of the world. It does not. That the United States exists as number one in a unipolar world, that we're the only ones that really matter. That's wrong. The world is today multipolar. There's different centers of power. And, we see with Russia and China meeting through the presence of Xi and Putin, that is one of the major poles that has been created. The next of course, has been and will continue to be the United States, the UK and Australia, and then you have India and the South. I think that we have a new understanding of the way the world is, and this old view that has trapped us in these wars is reflected in this proxy war in Ukraine, which the Ukrainian people are paying a horrible price for. They're pawns in a bigger game. The U.S. plan is has been to defeat Russia. That's not going to happen. To bleed Russia. That is happening, but Russia has shown its ability to withstand the U.S. Support in Ukraine, and now China has intervened to come up with a peace plan. That speaks volumes. I think this whole thing in Ukraine is a nightmare. And the people of Ukraine have suffered horribly. This never needed to happen. It should have been solved with diplomacy, with the Minsk agreement a long time ago, but that did not happen. And so the real plan underneath this was the U.S. was going to pin Russia in conflict in Ukraine, and then pivot to go after China in Taiwan. And there's people talking now with the same flawed thinking that somehow we're going to prepare for war against China in 2-3 years. It's madness. And we have to look at the world anew and understand that the world has changed from the post-World War II period where the United States reigned supreme as the singular global power. That doesn't happen anymore. And frankly, we can't afford, as a nation, we can't afford to rule the world. The whole idea as megalomaniacal fantasy needs to be to put to rest permanently.
Former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, always good to see you. Thank you so much for making the time. In part 2 of our program marking the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, I speak with a whistleblower with first-hand experience working in the Pentagon's Office of Special Plans in the lead-up to the Iraq War. She accuses top U.S. officials, chief among them then Vice President Dick Cheney, of willfully suppressing and cherry-picking information to justify the invasion, inventing arguments to go to war, a war of choice. I will also speak with Cheney's senior Middle East advisor and ask if, 20 years on, there are any regrets. For now, though, from me and the team in Washington, thanks for watching.